Alright, I really think this is going to be the easiest video in the world. Maybe. And it might be terrible. I went to Best Buy, and they had two different cases that were about $100. So I thought I would do a video on each case. But it's kind of a compare and contrast thing, you know? It's like, which one's better? Which one's the better bang for the buck? It depends. It depends on you. It depends on what you need. I can at least walk you through my thought process. First up, we get the MSI GUNGNIR. The thing that caught my eye on this is EATX, and it comes with a bunch of fans. It's also really big. Also, $100. The not quite as large NZXT H510i. What do you get? You get 5 fans? No, you get a couple of fans. You get an RGB controller. You also get a cam USB hub. The GUNGNIR, which I'm going to christen as Jar Jar once I get it built, that supports EATX up to 272 millimeters. Of course, it's a regular ATX case. It's got 2 regular USB 3.2 Gen 1. That's just the regular old USB port on the front. It's got 2 3.5, 4 2.5. That's drive bays. VGA card support up to 400 millimeter. CPU cooler support max of 170 millimeter. Our NZXT, on the other hand, only supports a maximum of 165 millimeter CPU clearance and 381 millimeters GPU clearance. So you lose about 5 millimeters in the CPU clearance and about 20 millimeters on the GPU clearance in terms of how long the GPU can be. This case is also not as tall. So in terms of which one would I pick, I'm looking at the specs of both of these. The MSI, it's bigger. I don't necessarily want bigger. Sometimes less is more. It depends on your preferences. The MSI comes with more fans. I'll get 3 120 millimeter fans and 1 RGB fan with the MSI, but the NZXT's got the LED strips and the cam controller and stuff like that, and so if you want to bling out the inside of your case, okay. The aesthetic here between these two cases is a little different. I mean, the MSI case was designed in Taiwan. That's usually a pretty good sign. The NZXT case, I mean, NZXT is known for their industrial design, so that's the thing that NZXT is known for. I mean, it's a thing. It's like you're getting the NZXT design. This is kind of a new thing with MSI. So let's actually do a build in this and see how that experience goes. Because you just look at the specs on the box, and it's like, that's what I'm looking at. I'm doing the evaluation. And I'd say the specs on the box, the MSI is ahead, even though usually I'm kind of a less is more sort of a person, unless I'm building the ridiculous Threadripper machines with like custom, you know, loop all-in-one kind of stuff. Plus I've also got this MSI power supply. Yeah, MSI is getting into power supplies now, so I'm gonna pair that up here. And again, both of these, pick these up at Best Buy. So I'm gonna set aside the NZXT H510 case for now. You can check that out in another video. And the H510i has disappeared to come back to another day. Be sure to check out that other video. For now, let's unbox. A+ on packaging, plenty of nice high density foam. Now something that you might not think about putting together a build like this is once you do your build, if you need to ship it, it's usually good to save the box. Although sometimes with different case boxes, it's not a good idea because the box is designed for an empty case, not a full case. And especially if you get a big heavy GPU, you'll want to support the weight of the GPU if you're going to ship it or transport it. Something that I really like about this case is that it comes with 4 fans. 1 RGB fan, 3 fans in the front. That is awesome. That's fabulous. 4 fans? You shouldn't need to buy any extra fans as long as these fans are reasonable. The doubt that comes into my mind is looking at the front here. See how the front's solid? There's not really much breathability. You get a little bit of breathability in that little vent on the side. But how hard is it to actually push air through there? Let's find out. That's not good. I had to sort of, that was definitely would give me problems if I were an asthmatic. It looks open at the bottom, but in fact is not. So there's what we're working with when we pop the front off, and I guarantee you, if you pop the front off this case, it is gonna breathe dramatically way better. Also pre-installed in the case, we can see we've got a little bit of an RGB strip here at the bottom. The front does have this neat little built-in dust filter on the sides, but again, look at this. Actually, that's not terrible. Now that I've taken the side off, it is better. And despite what you might think, the dust filters are not really removable. They're sort of melted in place. And I thought you might be able to take out some of the screws and get it to work with that, but no, that's... Here's your homework if you get this case. Run Hardware Info 64, play some games, stuff like that. Try it with and without the front. If it's 10 degrees cooler without the front, just run it without the front. All right, the other cool thing here is tempered glass side panel. It's just a piece of glass. There's no metal or anything like that. So you do have a lot of room to work with. The standoffs are pre-installed. You've got 7 slots at the back, a standard ATX cutout. You can do a 120 or a 140 millimeter fan at the back. That RGB fan at the back here, it's 120. They're all 120 millimeters in this case, although it will support 140 at the back. You do also have the option of installing some radiators or fans at the top if you want, but there's not really a vent in the top of the case. It's sort of more of this side and rear vent, but it does breathe a little bit better when I blow into it than the front did, so your mileage may vary. One thing that I do like about this case is that you've got room to mount the radiator here, but the fans are on the other side. So the fans are kind of on the outside of the case and the radiator could be mounted on the inside of the case. That's a good economical use of space that will also let you use ridiculously long video cards. This case would also really easily support a push-pull configuration for, say, a front 360 millimeter mounted radiator, which is a nice touch. Officially, in the specs for this case, in terms of radiator or AIO support, you can use, 280 millimeter or 420 millimeter in the front, also 360 millimeter, so basically two or three 140 millimeter fans, 2 or 3 120 millimeter fans. You can use a 280, 240, 140, whatever, at the top. Because of motherboard clearance, I would recommend that if you're going to use the top radiator that you stick to a 240, maybe 360 if you had to. For the power supply, 750 watts, this is the MPG A750GF. This is pretty much the minimum power supply I would recommend if you're going for higher end GPUs, like 3070, 3080, 3090, 6800, 6800 XT, 6900, and really for the 3090 and the 6900 and maybe the 6900 XT, you'd be better off with the 850. It depends on your CPU. If you're going Intel, 850 and on up. But for this build, ultimately, I decided on a B550 build with Ryzen. It's gonna be power sippy, relatively power frugal. That's gonna mean almost our entire power budget is gonna go for our GPU. Now this is MSI going for a, the premium feel power supply. How well this power supply performs or anything like that, I'm not really doing any of that kind of testing. You definitely wanna check out reviews where they plug this thing into like a sun moon power tester and basically test it under load. Now because this case is cavernous, what I'm going to recommend is any cables that you don't use, stuff them into the bottom. I mean, make sure that your power supply can breathe, don't block any fans or anything like that, but any cables from this that you don't use, don't leave them stored in the box because you're going to lose that. Just stuff it all into the bottom of the case. Now as I'm putting this power supply together, I've discovered a nice thing. So it comes with the peripheral cables and all that stuff, but it comes with both a VGA peripheral and a CPU peripheral cable. A lot of the time a power supply like this will come with, 2 8-pin power for CPU, and then all the remaining connections will go to VGA. Well, right now I've got one open connection, but 2 cables that'll fit. So I can elect to have 2 CPU power cables or an extra set of PCI Express peripheral cables. This is generally a pretty good thing because this lets you sort of mix and match. Hey, do I want to run home runs, dedicated wires for my really power hungry GPUs, or do I want them on separate cables? You see, one of the problems that NVIDIA had this generation with like the 3080 and why you see so many people putting, 3 connectors on the GPU, it's not because it really needs that much power. It's because if you use one cable and this one cable supplies your GPU, well, this one wire is not enough to deliver power to your GPU. You need to try to use multiple wires that run all the way back to your power supply. Now, if you have multiple things that use PCI Express power, you can mix them and it works out pretty fine, but you don't want to use just one of these cables to power your GPU, even if it's only got 2 connections. You want to use separate connections, at least with a high wattage GPU. But I definitely wanted to call out that this MSI power supply includes both cables to give you the option of what to choose. I like that. This is what we're working with for the motherboard. This is the B550 Gaming Carbon Wi-Fi. It is a B550 chipset, so it's the relatively lower cost chipset. It's AM4, and this motherboard supports Ryzen 3000 and Ryzen 5000 series processors, which is awesome. 2.5 gigabit LAN and some other nice features that sort of bring all this together. One of the really awesome things I like about this motherboard is it still has a PS2 output, which is awesome for people like me that are rocking Model M's. This has a USB-C front panel type connection, which means that it's going to be a little bit wasted in this case because there's no USB-C connection here, but I can order an aftermarket adapter and bring that extra USB-C port out the back of the case in one of the unused expansion slots or something like that if I really want to. This box contains all the screws that you need to mount the motherboard and your drives. And while we're doing the build, because I don't want to lose the thumb screws, you hear that? That one of them is already trying to escape. I'm going to go ahead and put the thumb screws in here so I don't lose them. The thumb screws on the backside panel, they're not captured. Now when you install your power supply, it's got to go in from this side. Some cases have an extra large cutout that'll let you slide the power supply in from the back. This MSI case does not have that feature. Got to kind of wedge it in like that. Now one nice feature this case has is this little cable hider thing. Even though this side is not tempered glass, when you route your cables behind here, there's an extra little place you can just completely hide your cables. And that's behind there. That might be a good place to hide your micro SD card that contains your cryptocurrency wallet. For your 3.5-inch drives, it's got two sleds. These are toolless sleds, so if you're gonna use it with a 3.5-inch drive, all you gotta do is just pop it in. It's got these little rails on the side that just pop right out. So it'll hold your 3.5-inch drive, no problem. And then it just, look at that. As you can hear, the fans are on with the default fan profile. Everything works great. Not every motherboard has this many fan headers. Our B550, Carbon, our MSI motherboard, has tons of fan headers. There's even extra fan headers on here. I've got my rear fan hooked up. I've got the three front fans hooked up, all with their own header. It's no problem. This case does not have a fan hub. Some of these larger cases, they'll often have a fan hub, but it does have an RGB hub. So you can hook up more RGB stuff up here in the top. It's got two 2.5-inch bays at the back that are, sort of accessible right here, so you can put your SSDs. Get the addressable RGB, and you get some accent lighting, here at the bottom. You can really see when you put the front on, what they were going for, the aesthetic. Now, putting the front on, taking it off, and then putting my hands where the fans are, I can definitely feel a reduction in airflow, just feeling of it. So again, your homework, if you pick up this case, is to run Hardware Info 64 for, an hour or two of gaming and see how badly your case heats up with and without the front. It's going to depend on your peripherals and how hard you're pushing your system if you thermally overrun this case with the front on. Alright, I'm pretty happy with where this build is. We still need to put our CPU, memory, video card, and finish the build. Let's get to it. Now for the rest of our build, I want to introduce something special. This is the G-Skill Anki 360, or Anki. This is a 360mm AIO liquid cooler with RGB. So the CPU that we're pairing with this, the 3950X. Why? That's still a little tricky to get a hold of the 5950X. If you can, definitely do it. I mean, goodness gracious, what an AM4 CPU. But the 3950X, it's gonna do just fine for our testing. We're gonna check out the thermals of this. And the GPU, as I mentioned before, it's a 3080 Supreme, but we're not there yet. If you're thinking about this AIO for your build, you should know it's fully compatible with AM4, but also AM3+, AM2, all the way back to like FM1 if you really wanted to. The Intel socket compatibility is 11.5X, 1200, 1366, 2011, 2011-3, and 2066 on the X299 platform. This also comes with a G-Skill 5-year warranty. And as someone that's had to use the G-Skill warranty before, customer service is excellent in my opinion. No, my plastic came off. Ah. So the first thing I noticed looking at this radiator is extreme fin density. Look at that. It's a lot of fins. And one thing that's nice is even though it comes with pre-installed thermal paste, my little plastic thing sort of went sideways, it's still got a syringe of extra thermal paste. It's a nice touch. The fans bundled with the Anki 360 are pretty nice. They're 500 to 2100 RPM, 12 volt, 4-pin, pretty cool. But they also have built-in rubber vibration dampening pads on both the top and bottom of the fan. So I'm gonna sandwich the fans here between the case and the radiator. I think that's gonna help reduce the vibration quite a bit. Now one thing I will say about this mounting mechanism is it kind of needs a lot of parts, and you pretty much have to assemble it in a horizontal configuration. I like mounting mechanisms where it's kind of all put together and you can kind of snap it in place and then screw it down if that ultimately works out. But there's a million little things you have to screw together, and when you actually clamp the CPU cooler, the pump, to the actual socket or to the CPU where it's making nice contact, you need a washer and a spring and the little thumb screw thing, and it's really hard to juggle all of that when you're putting it together, because it's like, where does the washer go, and did I get the washer, did I forget the washer, is everything there? I like it when everything is sort of will hold together. Makes it easier to change CPUs, it makes it easier to swap components, but that's me. I mean, you're probably not swapping your CPU every other week. But it is one of those quality of life things. That said, this mounting mechanism is really sturdy. It doesn't have any give or flex or anything like that, so it's well executed. I just wish that, you know, it were more sort of self-contained. I'd love it if they had a mounting mechanism that used the existing clamps on the socket, but you know, there's a smaller amount of pressure you can actually put on the socket without shearing off those little pieces of plastic. So I get why G.Skill did this. It makes sense. And again, our MSI motherboard comes to the rescue. It's got a Rainbow 2 header right where it needs to be to supply RGB connections to the pump, and another 4-pin fan header. Now with their CPU cooler, it doesn't come with a 3-way fan splitter. I would have preferred that, basically one cable going into 3 headers. But our motherboard does have enough fan headers, just enough, just barely, with the number of connections at the top of the board and the bottom of the board and the front edge, for actually all 7 fans in this case. There's 7 headers on the motherboard you can use for that, which is just astonishing on a B550 motherboard. But I guess everything comes together in the end. Now it does have an RGB control button. If you want, you can unhook it from the RGB controller and use it as a reset button, but if you press and hold it, it'll slave to the RGB controller on the motherboard. Otherwise, it is a full RGB controller, and you can just press the button for different RGB modes. Pressing and holding is what I've done here, so the RGB is sort of synced with everything. It is ARGB, so you know, you can use the MSI Mystic Light software and control pretty much everything in this entire system. Now overall, what's our build verdict? Well, I'm really happy with the build. The MSI 3080 SUPRIM obviously is the best part of the entire build. The sort of debut showing for me, the G.Skill 360mm closed loop radiator, again, very impressive. It's a non-Asetek design. I've discovered that the thermal paste that it comes with is better than the paste that was pre-installed, so definitely clean that off and use the paste that's in the package. The weakest link of this whole build honestly is the case, and I really think MSI could have done a better job there. So the top, you get these little holes at the back which don't have a filter, and then you've got these vents on the side which do have a filter. 9 out of 10 people are going to configure the top as an exhaust. These do not need to be here. They don't help you. What actually happens is a lot of the warm air from the top of the case goes back in through a vent at the top. You can take some clear packing tape and put over that, and you'll improve your case temperatures by about 4 degrees C because it'll force the air out. Now, because the G.Skill fans that I'm using have a relatively high static pressure, it does a pretty good job exhausting out the top here. I mean, this thing has 7 fans in it, which is a little bit overkill. Normally, you'd get a case like this and you would put the 360mm radiator in the front, because a case like this will probably only come with like 1 fan. It's awesome that it comes with 4 fans. Same kind of story for the front intake, except on the front intake, having these little mesh things does kind of help because they're dust filters, but it also hurts breathability. So with the side on and the tempered glass side panel, this thing will internally heat up to be about 65 degrees C, worst case scenario, 62 degrees C for a 4-hour Cyberpunk 2077 gaming session. And I could lower that to like 50 degrees C just by popping the front and the top off. That's it, just removing these plastic bezels, nothing else. Of course, you have unfiltered air coming into the front of your machine, but it's way better breathability. I feel like MSI could have done a better job overall on the case. The motherboard, the power supply, and especially the video card, I could not be happier with. The 360mm all-in-one cooler, could not be happier. It's awesome, it's pretty good. So I think the weakest link on this build, kind of the case, sorry to say. Now, if you're running a lesser video card or, you know, not a 16-core CPU and your build is not going to generate as much heat, well, these things are going to be less of a concern for you because there's not as much heat production inside the case and the breathability is not going to matter quite as much. If you have this case and you're running a similar build that, like I am, you can just take like one of your old expansion slot covers with the top here. You can just do that. Just grab this, rip these off. It's still not quite as good as the open air configuration, but it's definitely better, and it's an exhaust, so what does it matter? I'm Will, this is level 1, this has been a fun build. I like building systems like this. If you build a system like this, or you want to show off something, or it was inspired, come to the level 1 forums, post some pictures, show off, I'd love to see it. I'm signing out, and I'll see you there. Aha. Really? Okay. Yeah, well, alright, well, I mean, it's good. Thanks. So it turns out MSI sort of realized that there were some improvements to be made. Introducing the GUNGNIR Definitely an improvement over the 100. I haven't tested it, but look, they did what I suggested. I didn't even know that was a thing until this video was almost done. And it's done. So, if you have a choice of the 110, you should definitely do that.